Ghastly Flins will whisk your enemies into their graves, and today I'm here to tell you how to build him best. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So what does this oh-so-handsome gentleman desire in terms of artifacts? Well, none other than 4-piece Knight of Disguise Unveiling. This is obviously his tailor-made 4-piece set, and it is easily going to be his best in slot. Absolutely worth farming for him and is going to be very consistent. It does have one key requirement though. You really want to play him with 2 Not Cry characters in order to fully max out this set's passive. However, if you do so, then you get plenty of free crit rate, up to 30% in fact, which is quite a lot, and you also get lunar reaction damage increase. The 2-piece providing elemental mastery is also really nice too, because Flins really wants EM. So, all things considered, this is easily his best bet. Otherwise, if you're playing him with our dearest Hydro Archon, then you can even consider 4-piece Mayonnaise Hunters. It's pretty straightforward as to why this set is good. It doesn't fall that far behind his best in slot set, and it provides you with plenty of crit rate. Now, I personally would just still try and farm his best in slot set, because you generally only use Farina if you have a Nepha on the team, so you're already going to have 2 Not Cry characters in your team anyway. And Mayonnaise Hunters does limit you to specifically having to use Lady Farina in Flins' teams. So I personally would still go for Knight of Disguise Unveiling, however, Hunters is still going to be a perfectly viable replacement option for you. As for Flins' main stats, simple. Go for attack percent, crit percent. You don't actually want to go for electro damage bonus percent, because he doesn't really scale off of conventional damage bonus. It's actually better to stack up attack on him instead, because he really heavily scales off of it, and he's also able to convert attack into EM, thus making this easily his highest damaging and most optimal setup. As for Flins' stat goals, simple. On signature, go for 2,800 attack, 60 to 200 crit rate and damage, and 250 elemental mastery. And on craftable, go for 2,800 attack, 45 to 190 crit rate and damage, and 250 EM. The rest of the EM that you're going to need is going to be covered by team buffs, and also his own inbuilt Ascension passive, which is able to convert attack into EM for him. This is also the amount of stats that you need before battle. Make sure that you keep that in mind. As for Flins' ER requirements, simple. He has 2 different sets of ER requirements, depending on whether you're using a signature weapon or if you're using a different weapon. This is because his SIG drastically lowers his ER requirements. So, take a look, see what you need, and go for it. Other weapons aren't able to help him regenerate elemental energy like his signature does. That's the main key element that changes here. In terms of sets, I really do just advise farming for his best in slot signature set because it does so much for him. Yes, you do have placeholder options, but I think that you just generally get the most consistent performance whenever you go for his prime set. This Lightkeeper is going to need the right tools in order to keep the Wild Hunt at bay. So, what'll those be? Blood-Soaked Ruins is easily going to be his absolute best bet when it comes to signature weapons. I mean, it just makes sense. Not only does it provide him with a crud ton of base attack and plenty of crit rate, but it directly increases the amount of lunar charge damage that he deals to enemies by 36% at R1. That is really good, and after he triggers a lunar charge reaction, he's able to get more crit rate. Not to mention being able to restore elemental energy for himself, which seriously lowers his own ER requirements. All around, a very comfortable weapon for him that makes him easier to play, while also being very strong. I will say that if you have other 5-star weapon options for him, then you would actually rather go for his C1 first. However, if you generally don't have any good weapon options, then sure, you could consider going for this first, but I generally would recommend getting the C1 first. Otherwise, Staff of the Scarlet Sand is going to end up being ridiculously good on him. Definitely make sure that you focus your build more on crit damage, especially if you're using his signature set, because you're gonna have a ton of crit rate when building this weapon. The passive just meshes really well with him, and genuinely, if you have a Staff of the Scarlet Sands, don't go for Sig. It is genuinely only like 5% worse, and you would literally rather just get the C1 in that case. Otherwise, if you have an Nepha's weapon, then that's also another one that you can consider using over a signature. He doesn't create shield, so you're not getting the second half of the passive, but you're still getting the first half, and all around it's a pretty good stat stick for him. Any other 5-star weapon that's a stat stick is going to end up being very strong in him, but I'm going to give a special shout out to Staff of Homa. This is because if you're playing him in a team with Lady Farina involved, then you're always going to be at 50% HP. This is because you're not going to have any source of healing in his teams, and there's no teammate that you can reasonably slot into his comps that would be able to provide that for you, and the Nepha is a shielder, she doesn't heal whatsoever, so you're always going to be at 50%. However, this allows you to effectively abuse Staff of Homa's passive on Flins, so that's a cool little synergy. Otherwise, the free-to-play friendly Inazuma event polearm is going to be really good on him if you don't have any 5-star weapon options. If not that, Then you can go for Prospector Shovel, which is the brand new Notcry craftable. It gets a lot better with refinements, and the passive is perfectly tailored to Flins' kit. Generally, my advice with Flins weapons is always going to be the same. If you have something that is a good enough stat stick, use it and then get C1 instead. If you insist on getting the drip though, it is still a very strong weapon for him. It is easily his bestest slot and is absolutely fantastic all around. However, I really would advise to just get his C1 if you have the extra Primo Gems to invest and you were wondering whether you should get his weapon or C1. Very specifically if you have Staff of the Scarlet Sands, it's just really not worth investing in the weapon at that point. Either way, all around he has some pretty good options and you should be able to find something for him. Yet who is going to be joining Flins on his expeditions to clear out the Wild Hunt? Well, in terms of Notcry teammates, there are two main particular ones that you're really going to want. We're going to have to go over the most obvious one first, that being Anefa. She is ridiculously strong for him, and is a ridiculous damage increase to his teams. Ideally, you would have her as your final slot teammate, and if you don't have her, there are some other options which I'll cover a bit later, but let's just glaze Anefa's performance with him for a little bit. She provides amazing personal damage, she gives a base damage bonus to Lunar Charged, and has a team-wide Elemental Mastery bonus, as well as good particle generation and a shield. That is a lot in one kit. She is amazing for him, and is a fantastic pickup. If you don't have her, that's fine. You can compensate by pulling for Flins' C1, but otherwise, you ideally do have her. In terms of Hydro teammates, there are two primary ones that you're going to want to use. Ino or Lady Farina. Ino's the primary one. She has a good C1 and C6 for him, and all around is just going to be a fine enough free-to-play friendly option until we get an upgrade later down the line. She will serve you fine, and if you're a free-to-play that doesn't have an Anefa, then she's going to serve as your second Notcry character, so that you're able to trigger Flins' 4-piece set. Otherwise, you can consider using our dearest Hydro Archon, Lady Farina. I would like you to keep in mind that this is only going to be something that you can use if you have an Anefa, because like I said, I really want to stress, you need two Notcry characters in his team, and you cannot just forfeit using an Anefa or forfeit using Ino. You need at least one of them. The funny thing is, her damage bonus % buff is actually incredibly wasted here. The main reason as to why you would be using her is for her personal damage. Yes, even at C0R0 on a Favonius sword, her own personal damage can still justify her being used, even if she's not contributing any buffs to the team. This is more so just a testament to how Ino just isn't really a good unit, but I'm sure down the line we will eventually get an upgrade here. In terms of animal units, just use Sucrose. I'm seriously going to stress this, just use Sucrose. There is no point in using any other Animo. Her EM share is fantastic for Flins, and there is no conceivable reason as to why you should choose any other Animo. You can use another one if you don't have Sucrose for the time being, but the moment that you even pick up even a C0 Sucrose, slaughter into your Flins team immediately. She hasn't been best in slot anywhere for a hot minute now, but boy is she wanted in Flins teams. So definitely use Sucrose with Flins if you can. If you don't have her, then other animals will work fine as a replacement for the time being so that you can at least get the Viridescent Shred, but otherwise, use Sucrose. Prioritize that EM. Alternate fourth slots include Fischl for her particle generation and personal damage contributions, or Orderon because he's just generally good in Electro Charge teams. Just keep in mind that if you're using Orderon, then you're going to want to build a little bit more ER on your Flins, because he's not going to be able to provide him with as many particles. But all things considered, they're going to be perfectly serviceable, and you'll get by just fine on them. No, they won't be as good as Anefa, but that's fine, you don't really need them to be as good as Anefa. They'll get the job done just fine for you. Example teams include Flins, Ino, Sucrose, Fischl or Orderon, Handsome Graveyard Man, the Little Kid, or Lady Farina, Sucrose once again, and Anefa. As for Flins' talent priority, simple, go for this. His kit really heavily depends on his burst. Like, it is the mass majority of his damage output, and it is where all of the main meat is stored. Definitely level that up first, above anything else. You can then level up his skill and basically ignore his normal attacks, but I really want to emphasize, do not ignore the masterclass of an elemental burst that is. It is really good for him. Would you like to donate to the cause of the Lightkeepers? Then let's talk Constellations. His C1 is ridiculously good. Not only does it reduce his ER requirements, but it allows him to fit 3 mini bursts in per rotation. This is able to compensate for not having a freaking Anefa. That is a pretty big deal, and is a very nice way to save on investment if you weren't able to pick up an Anefa before. And if you do have the Robot Lady, then it still ends up being a ridiculously good increase for you. Very, very strong C1, and I would honestly get this over a signature weapon in basically every circumstance. Especially if you have Staff of the Scarlet Sands on you. Very, very highly recommended, very good C1. His C2 only furthers his personal damage, and to be honest, I still think that it's actually worth getting a C2, up to a C2 at least, before you even think of getting a signature weapon. Of course, you can go for the drip first if it interests you more, but I'm just being completely honest when I say his first 2 Constellations are just absolutely nuts. Very, very good C2. Absolutely worth your time. Now, at C3, this is when you would rather get the signature weapon as opposed to getting this Constellation next. However, it's still a perfectly fine Constellation, just not as good as the first 2. His C4 is able to increase the amount of EM that he's able to convert from his attack, which is a really big deal. Fantastic C4 and definitely worth your time. Of course, you don't need it by any means, you don't need Constellations in general to be honest, but this is a great C4. His C5 is perfectly fine and is a nice upgrade. And then once you reach his C6, oh boy, you are eating well. It is very, very strong and even helps out your team's lunar charge reaction damage, which is great whenever you consider that Nefa is able to do a ton of personal damage herself. Fantastic C6, and all around a very good Constellation lineage. Personally, I think that Flins is an excellent character. He definitely fills the electro charge niche well, and I'm sure that whenever we eventually get Columbina, he's going to rise up to easily be the best electro DPS in the game. He is fantastically cool, I love him a lot, and his character design is absolutely incredible. At least I'm personally a huge fan of him. How about yourself? Are you a fan of Flins? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hopefully this video is able to get your Flins sending his enemies to their graves. This has been Juice, signing out, and I hope you enjoy your new electro charge, gentlemen.